Chapter 1: The Luxury Threshold. The air inside Vanguard Horology doesn't just feel clean, it feels expensive. We use a specialized HVAC system that filters the air to a crisp, scentless purity, removing the microparticles of dust that are the natural enemies of a mechanical movement. When you step through our heavy, sound-dampened glass doors, the humidity of the city vanishes, replaced by a climate-controlled vacuum that smells faintly of high-grade leather and ozone. My name is Maya, and for 7 years, I have been the senior boutique manager here. In the world of high-end horology, I am less of a retail worker and more of a curator for a high-security vault. We don't sell clocks. We sell artifacts of precision engineering that often cost more than the average American's mortgage. Because of this, the customer service we provide isn't the frantic, subservient energy you'd find at a big-box store. It is a calculated, stoic grace. In this industry, you learn a hard truth early on. The customer is always right is a polite fiction we maintain only until the moment their entitlement threatens the integrity of the house. To survive this job, I developed what I call my customer service mask. It's a neutral, pleasant expression that gives away absolutely nothing. It's a face of marble, friendly enough to be professional, but cold enough to signal that I cannot be manipulated. I've spent thousands of hours in front of a mirror perfecting it. I know exactly how to blink so it doesn't look like I'm judging you, even when I'm watching you handle a $50,000 tourbillon with greasy fingers. People often ask if I get nervous working around such wealth. The answer is no. The watches aren't the source of stress, the people are. The boutique is a stage where the wealthiest 1% come to perform their status, and sometimes that performance involves treating the staff like stagehands rather than human beings. That's why our security is unmatched. Most people see the marble floors and the velvet-lined display cases. What they don't see are the 4K wide-angle lenses tucked into the crown molding. We have 16 cameras in a 400-square-foot space. They are high-definition enough to capture the serial number on a bill or the exact pore dilation of a visitor's skin. They record in a loop, backed up to a redundant, off-site server that I can access from my phone at any time. I've seen it all. The influencers, who try to take selfies with watches they can't afford, the heirs who think a name is a substitute for a credit limit, and the occasional professional thief. But none of them prepared me for the rotten root of entitlement that is Beatrice Van Horn. Before she ever walked in, I knew her type. In retail, there is a specific vibration in the air when a disaster is approaching. It's like the drop in barometric pressure before a hurricane. On that Tuesday, at exactly 2:14 p.m., the pressure dropped. I was standing behind the primary consultation desk, adjusting my cuffs and checking the daily inventory logs when the chime echoed. It wasn't a gentle entry. Most of our clients linger at the door, taking in the atmosphere. This woman marched. She trailed a cloud of perfume that cost $400 an ounce, but smelled like aggressive florals and unearned confidence. She clutched a designer handbag like a weapon and held a small, velvet-lined box in her other hand. She didn't look at the displays. She didn't acknowledge the other 2 clients, a quiet couple looking at anniversary pieces in the corner. She walked straight to my desk, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble, and slammed the velvet box onto the glass counter. Not placed, slammed. I felt the vibration through the glass. Beneath that counter sat a tray of handcrafted cufflinks, each set worth $1,500. If the glass had shattered, she would have been liable for thousands before she even opened her mouth. But I didn't flinch.
I didn't even blink. I simply adjusted my mask, looked her in the eye, and waited for the first wave of the storm. "Refund. Now," she said. Her voice had that jagged, upper-crust rasp of someone who has spent their entire life being told yes. I took a breath of that filtered, scentless air. The game had begun.
Chapter 2: The Storm Breaks. Beatrice Van Horn didn't just want a refund, she wanted a tribute. She stood there, her chest rising and falling in rhythmic heaves of manufactured outrage. Up close, I could see the work that had gone into her face, the fillers, the Botox, the expensive peels, all designed to freeze time, much like the watches in my cases. But her eyes were moving fast, darting around the store to see if anyone was watching her performance. She needed an audience. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice a steady, low-frequency hum. "It's a technique I learned from a hostage negotiator's podcast. Lower your pitch, slow your cadence, and never match their volume."
I'm Maya, the boutique manager. How can I assist you today? Don't give me the script, Maya, she snapped, leaning over the counter. She was close enough that I could see the microfine cracks in her foundation. I don't care about your name or your assistance. I care about my money. My husband bought this piece of junk here 3 days ago, and it's already broken. It's a lemon. I want the $22,000 back on my American Express immediately.
I looked down at the velvet box. It was one of ours, the deep navy blue of the Criterion line. I reached out, my movements slow and deliberate, and pulled the box toward me. I didn't open it immediately. I wanted to establish control over the physical space first. "I understand you're frustrated," I said, which is a non-apology we're trained to use. It acknowledges the emotion without admitting fault. "May I examine the timepiece?" "Examine it. What is there to examine? It's broken. It stopped ticking this morning."
She threw her hands up, her heavy gold bracelets clattering against each other. I expect better from a place that pretends to be exclusive. This is a scam. You're selling refurbished trash to people who actually have taste. I ignored the insult and opened the box.
Inside sat a Criterion GMT. It is a masterpiece of horological engineering, featuring a dual time zone complication and a 70-hour power reserve. It is also, for all its beauty, a machine. And machines tell stories to those who know how to read them. The story this watch told was one of violence. The sapphire crystal, one of the hardest materials on Earth, second only to diamond, wasn't just scratched. It was shattered at the 4 o'clock marker. Small, crystalline shards lay like salt across the dial. The brushed steel casing, which should have been a flawless satin finish, was gouged. There were deep, jagged ruts in the metal that looked as if the watch had been dragged across a gravel driveway or slammed against a concrete pillar with significant force. "I see," I whispered. I didn't look up yet. I was enjoying the silence I was creating by focusing so intently on the damage.
You see it's broken, so do the refund. I finally looked up, maintaining the mask. Mrs. Van Horn, I've located the sales record in our system. This GMT was indeed purchased on Saturday. At that time, it underwent a full physical inspection and was signed off by the purchaser as being in pristine condition. Are you calling my husband a liar? She hissed. The other couple in the store was now staring openly. Beatrice loved it. She turned slightly to ensure they could hear her next line. He brought it home and it sat on my dresser. I put it on this morning and it fell apart. It's a manufacturing defect.
Sapphire crystal does not fall apart, Mrs. Van Horn, I said calmly. I pointed to the gouge on the lug. This is impact damage. Per the signed sales agreement, which I have here on the digital tablet, and which your husband initialed on page 3, refunds are only applicable to items in pristine, unworn condition. This watch has suffered a catastrophic impact that is not covered under the manufacturer's warranty for return. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the moment where a normal person would realize they were caught and try to negotiate a repair. But Beatrice wasn't normal. She was a boutique Karen of the highest order. Her face shifted from red to a deep, vibrating purple. Her eyes bulged slightly. This was the moment she realized that her status, her name, her perfume, her husband's bank account, wasn't working as a skeleton key.
The policy wall had been erected, and it was made of the same hardened steel as the watch she had destroyed. You're joking, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're actually going to try and quote initials to me? Do you have any idea who we are? We spend more in a weekend than you make in a decade, you glorified clerk. I didn't answer. I just stood there, hands folded, watching the spittle form at the corners of her mouth. The storm wasn't breaking, it was just reaching the eye.
Chapter 3: The Damaged Goods. The technical specifications of the Criterion GMT are a point of pride for Vanguard horology. The sapphire crystal is 2.5 millimeters thick, treated with 7 layers of anti-reflective coating. It is designed to withstand the pressure of 100 meters of water and the incidental bumps of a daily luxury lifestyle. To shatter it requires a specific type of focused, kinetic energy. To gouge the 316L surgical-grade stainless steel casing requires even more. As Beatrice continued to loom over the counter, her shadow blotting out the light from the display case, I performed a mental audit of the damage.
This wasn't a drop on the bathroom tile situation. This was a thrown against a wall in a fit of rage situation. I am a busy woman, Maya, Beatrice barked, snapping her fingers in my face. I don't have time for your little forensic investigation. I want the money back. Now, or do I need to call the owner? I'm sure he'd love to know his manager is harassing a platinum-tier client over a drop of water. I didn't react to the snapping fingers. I've found that when people try to invade your personal space with gestures, the most powerful thing you can do is remain perfectly still.
It makes them look frantic and small. I'm afraid I cannot process a refund, Mrs. Van Horn, I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. However, I can offer to send the piece to our master watchmaker for a service estimate.
Replacing the crystal and the casing is a complex procedure, but we can certainly restore it to its original. I don't want a service estimate, she screamed. The volume was so high now that the quiet couple in the corner finally stood up and walked toward the exit. I caught the man's eye. He looked apologetic, but they weren't going to stay in a war zone. I want a new watch or my money. This is fraud. You sold us a defective product. The product was not defective, ma'am, I replied.
I turned the watch box around so she could see the damage from my perspective. I pointed to a tiny, microscopic fleck of what looked like white paint embedded in the deep gouge of the lug. It appears the watch struck a hard, painted surface, likely a wall or a doorframe, at high velocity. This is accidental damage, which is explicitly excluded from our return policy. Beatrice froze. She saw the paint fleck. For a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew exactly when it happened. She knew she had thrown it.
But the rotten root of her ego wouldn't allow for an admission of guilt. Admission was for the little people. That was there when we bought it, she stammered, her lie instantly pivoting. My husband noticed it. He was going to bring it back anyway. This just proves my point. You sold us a used, damaged watch as new. This was the pivot of the desperate. When the it broke on its own, life fails, they moved to it was already like that. Mrs. Van Horn, I said, tapping the tablet screen.
We take high-resolution, macro photographs of every timepiece at the point of sale. These are attached to the digital receipt. Would you like to review the photos taken on Saturday? They show the watch at 20x magnification from 6 different angles. There was no paint. There were no gouges. The crystal was flawless. I watched her process this. I was giving her the data, one cold brick at a time, building a tomb for her argument. In the Reddit world, we call this the receipts. Literally. She wasn't just losing an argument, she was losing her sense of reality.
In her world, if she said the sky was neon green, people would nod and agree to keep the peace. But I wasn't there to keep the peace. I was there to keep the record. I don't care about your little pictures, she roared, her voice cracking with the effort of her rage. Pictures can be faked. This is a setup. You're trying to scam me. You're probably going to keep the money and the watch. She was sweating now. A thin sheen of perspiration was ruining her expensive makeup. She looked around the empty store, her audience gone, her only witness being the 16 unblinking eyes of the security cameras. I want to speak to the owner, she demanded, her finger poking the glass counter. Get him on the phone, now. If you don't, I will make it my life's mission to see this place shut down. I know the editor of the Social Gazette. I'll have a front-page story about your scam by Friday.
The owner is currently in Switzerland for the Baselworld event, I said, which was true. And my instructions are to adhere strictly to the boutique's policies. There are no exceptions, Mrs. Van Horn, not for the editor of the Gazette and not for you. That was the line that did it. The not for you was the final blow to her ego. She didn't see herself as a person, she saw herself as an exception, and I had just told her she was a rule. Chapter 4: The Policy Wall. The policy wall isn't just a set of rules, it's a psychological fortress. In high-end retail, we are trained to use the manual as both a shield and a mace. The moment Beatrice Van Horn realized that her name held no weight, she moved into the escalation of one.
This is the phase where the antagonist tries to create so much chaos that you'll give them what they want just to make the noise stop. "You are a pathetic little girl," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with a vitriol that was almost impressive in its purity. She wasn't shouting anymore, she was vibrating. "You sit behind this counter and play with toys you'll never own, and you think that gives you power over people like me? You're a servant, Maya. A servant who has forgotten her place."
I didn't flinch. I had entered gray rock mode fully now. To a person like Beatrice, an emotional reaction is fuel. If I got angry, she'd feel powerful. If I got sad, she'd feel dominant. But if I stayed neutral, if I stayed like a gray rock, she'd have nothing to latch onto. She would be screaming at a void. "I am the manager of this boutique, Mrs. Van Horn," I said, my voice a monotone. "And as such, I am responsible for the assets within it. The policy on returns is non-negotiable. It is clearly stated on your receipt, on the signage at the entrance, and in the contract your husband signed."
"Stop talking about the contract," she shrieked, her volume spiking again. "I don't care about your little papers. I'm Beatrice Van Horn. I don't follow policies. I make them." She began pacing the small floor space, her heels clicking a frantic, irregular rhythm. She was looking for something to break. She stopped at the display of our heritage straps, hand-stitched alligator and ostrich leather bands that retailed for $800 apiece. "Is this how you treat your best customers?" she asked, her voice dangerously high.
"By quoting contracts to them, by accusing them of lying." "I haven't accused you of anything, ma'am," I replied. "I have simply presented the physical evidence of the timepiece and compared it to the record of its condition at the time of purchase. The two do not match."
"Because you're a liar," she screamed. She reached out and swept a small, decorative crystal vase off a side table. It hit the marble floor and shattered with a sound like a gunshot. I didn't move. I didn't even look at the floor.
"That vase was a LazyQ original," I said calmly. "It is valued at $3,000. I will be adding that to the incident report." She stopped. For a second, I thought the cost might register, but she was too far gone. The rotten root had taken over.
She was in a full-blown narcissistic collapse. "Add it," she laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "Add whatever you want. I'm not paying for anything. In fact, you're going to pay me. You're going to pay for the watch, for the insult, and for my time." She turned back to the counter, her eyes wild. She began sweeping the displays off the glass with her handbag. A tray of leather travel rolls went flying. A display of watch-winding boxes was shoved aside, their motors humming as they tumbled. "Look at this mess," she yelled, gesturing to the chaos she was creating. "This is what happens when you don't show respect. This is your fault, Maya, all of it." I reached under the counter. Not for the silent alarm, not yet.
I reached for the digital control panel that managed our internal logging. I pressed the incident button. This didn't call the police, but it did three things. It bookmarked the last 10 minutes of footage on all 16 cameras. It started a high-fidelity audio recording from the desk-mounted microphone, and it sent a priority one alert to our regional legal team.
"Are you even listening to me?" she shrieked. She leaned over the counter again. This time she was so close that her nose was nearly touching mine. "I want my money. Give me the cash from the drawer. Give it to me now, or I swear to God, I will burn this place to the ground."
"We do not keep $22,000 in cash on the premises, Mrs. Van Horn," I said. "And as I have stated, I cannot process a refund. I suggest you take a moment to breathe. You are currently committing property damage and making verbal threats. These are being recorded in high definition."
She laughed again, that same jagged, broken sound. "You think I'm afraid of your little cameras? My lawyer will have those tapes erased before the sun goes down. Do you know who my lawyer is? He's on the board of the police foundation. He is the law." She was leaning so far over the counter that she was starting to lose her balance. Her face was inches from mine, her breath smelling of espresso and desperation. "I'm going to give you one last chance," she whispered, her eyes narrow and dark. "Process the refund, now, or I'm going to make sure you never work in this town again. I'll tell everyone you tried to solicit a bribe. I'll tell them you stole from me. Who are they going to believe? A boutique girl or a Van Horn?" "They will believe the record," I said.
That was the death token. I had given her the ultimate truth, and she couldn't handle it. She reached out, her hand trembling with rage, and grabbed the heavy velvet watch box. I knew what was coming. I saw the muscles in her forearm tense. I saw her eyes lock onto my face. In my head, I was already writing the report. Target, face. Weapon, Criterion GMT box. Intent, assault. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I stayed silent. I let her commit. Chapter 5. Entering Gray Rock. The Gray Rock method is a psychological tool used to neutralize toxic individuals. When you deal with a narcissist like Beatrice Van Horn, you have to understand that they are emotional vampires. They feed on your reactions. If you scream back, they feel validated in their anger. If you cry, they feel powerful. But if you become a gray rock, unmoving, unresponsive, and utterly boring, they begin to starve. As Beatrice stood there, clutching the velvet watch box like a jagged stone, I felt my heart rate slow down. It's a strange phenomenon that happens in high-stress retail. The more chaotic the customer becomes, the more clinical I get. I wasn't Maya the person anymore, I was Maya the process. "You have nothing to say," Beatrice hissed.
Her hand was raised now, the box held high. "No clever comeback, no more policy to quote at me." I simply looked at her. I didn't look at the box. I looked at her eyes. I didn't blink. I didn't offer a word. Silence is the ultimate mirror. It forces the person to see their own reflection in the void you've created. "You think you're better than me," she said, her voice trembling. "That's it, isn't it? You think because you have a little integrity and a manual, you're on a higher level. But you're nothing. You're a placeholder, a cog in a machine that doesn't even know you exist." I remained a rock. "Look at me," she roared. I was looking at her, but I wasn't seeing her the way she wanted.
I wasn't seeing a socialite or a powerful woman. I was seeing a material threat in a sequence of events that was being logged in real time. She couldn't take the silence. The vacuum I had created was pulling the air out of her lungs. She needed a spark. She needed me to beg, to move, to do anything. When the spark didn't come, she provided her own. She hurled the box. The Criterion watch boxes are not light. They are made of solid, high-density wood covered in premium velvet, with a weighted base to ensure they sit firmly on a desk. They weigh nearly 2 pounds. She threw it from a distance of less than 3 feet. I didn't move. I didn't duck. I didn't put my hands up to protect my face. If I had moved, her lawyer could argue later that I had provoked her or that it was a mutual altercation. But by staying still, I was ensuring that the video would show a clear, unprovoked act of assault. The corner of the box caught me on the left cheekbone. It was a sharp, stinging pain that radiated through my jaw. I felt the skin break, a clean, thin line. I felt the warmth of a single drop of blood beginning to crawl down my face. The box hit the floor behind me with a heavy thud, the shattered watch spilling out onto the carpet. Beatrice gasped. It wasn't a gasp of regret. It was a gasp of shock that I hadn't moved. She had expected me to scream, to fall, to cover my face. Instead, I just stood there, the drop of blood reaching my chin, my expression unchanged. The gray rock had been struck, but it hadn't cracked.
You should have moved," she whispered, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning terror. For the first time, a sliver of reality had pierced her delusion. She had just assaulted someone on camera. I didn't speak. I didn't touch my face. I didn't even acknowledge the pain. I just kept looking at her. "It's your fault!" she suddenly screamed, her voice hitting a frequency that sounded like tearing metal. She reached across the counter again. This time she wasn't throwing something. She was reaching for me. She grabbed my collar. Her fingers, adorned with diamonds that could have paid for my college education twice over, dug into the fabric of my professional blazer. She jerked me forward, her face inches from mine, her breath hot and smelling of the expensive lunch she'd had earlier. Look at me when I'm talking to you, she shrieked. You don't get to stay silent. You don't get to judge me. I am Beatrice Van Horn. I am the one who talks. You are the one who listens. I let her hold me. In my head, I was counting.
1. Battery, unwanted physical contact. 2. Assault, intent to cause fear harm. 3. Interference, preventing me from performing my duties. 4. Aggravation, the presence of a weapon the box earlier. 5. On the 5th second, she realized what she was doing. She saw her own reflection in the 4K lens of camera 4, which was pointed directly at her from over my shoulder. She saw the blood on my cheek. She saw the absolute, terrifying lack of fear in my eyes. She let go. She stepped back, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip her handbag to keep them still. She looked around the boutique, which now looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Shattered glass, leather straps, winding boxes, and the broken Criterion watch were scattered everywhere.
I'm calling my husband, she stammered, fumbling for her phone in her bag. Her victim mask was being frantically reconstructed. He'll have you fired by sunset. He'll have this place leveled. You attacked me. You provoked me. I was defending myself.
I didn't say a word. I simply stepped back, away from the counter, and picked up the store's landline. I dialed 3 digits. Police, I said, my voice as steady as the ticking of a healthy watch. I'd like to report a physical assault, battery, and extensive property damage at Vanguard Horology. The suspect is still on the premises and is acting in an erratic and dangerous manner. Beatrice's face went from red to a ghostly, mottled white. The theater was over, the recording was final, and the gray rock was about to become an avalanche. Chapter 6. The Arrival of Reality. The chime of the glass doors for the 3rd time that day didn't signal a new customer. It signaled the end of Beatrice Van Horn's sovereignty. 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police Department stepped in, their boots sounding heavy and discordant against the marble. Their presence immediately sucked the oxygen out of Beatrice's frantic energy. I was still standing behind the counter. I hadn't moved to wipe the blood from my cheek. I hadn't straightened my blazer. I wanted the scene to be as raw as possible when they walked in.
In the world of cold justice, you don't clean up the crime scene before the investigators arrive. You let the chaos speak for you. Officers, thank God! Beatrice's voice underwent a radical transformation. Gone was the jagged, rasping roar of the predator. In its place was a high-pitched, warbling tremolo of a victim. She actually staggered, a practiced, theatrical stumble, toward the younger of the 2 officers. I've been so terrified. This woman, this manager. She's insane.
The officers stopped, looking at the wreckage on the floor. The LazyQ vase was a glittering sea of shards. The Criterion watch was lying face down like a dead bird. The leather straps were scattered like fallen leaves. It looked like a boutique that had been hit by a localized hurricane.
"Are you the one who called?" the older officer asked, his eyes moving from Beatrice to me. He was a veteran. I could see him taking in the details, his gaze lingering on the thin line of blood on my face.
I am, I said. My voice was calm, a sharp contrast to Beatrice's frantic breathing. My name is Maya. I am the manager. Mrs. Van Horn here has caused extensive property damage and has physically assaulted me twice.
That's a lie, Beatrice shrieked, clutching her handbag to her chest. She's the one who started it. She tried to scam me. She told me my husband's watch was fake, and then she lunged at me. I was only trying to protect myself. I threw that box to keep her away from me. Look at the mess she made trying to grab my bag. It was a masterclass in projection. Every act of violence she had committed, she was now attributing to me. She was banking on the socialite privilege.
She assumed a woman of her standing, draped in silk and gold, would be more believable than a manager in a uniform. "Ma'am, please step back," the younger officer said to Beatrice. He wasn't buying the stagger. He looked at the counter, then at me. "You said there was an assault."
Yes, I replied. I didn't point at my face. I didn't have to. She threw a weighted watch box at my head, which caused a laceration to my left cheekbone. Subsequently, she reached across the counter and grabbed me by the collar, jerking me forward and making verbal threats against my life and career.
I did no such thing, Beatrice cried, her face mottled with a new kind of red, the red of a liar being boxed in. She's bleeding because she fell. She tripped over her own feet while she was screaming at me. I've never been so insulted in my life. Do you know who my husband is?
He's Charles Van Horn. He's on the board of the— Ma'am, we don't care who your husband is, the older officer interrupted. He turned back to me. Do you have any witnesses?
The other customers left when the violence began, I said. However, I have 16 unblinking witnesses that saw everything in 4K resolution. I gestured toward the crown molding. I have 16 security cameras that capture high-definition video and audio. The entire interaction, from the moment Mrs. Van Horn entered the store and slammed that box on the counter to the moment she grabbed my throat, is recorded on a redundant off-site server. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. Beatrice's mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. She looked up at the cameras. For the first time, she saw them not as background decoration, but as the instruments of her downfall. She had spent her life believing she could rewrite history, but she hadn't accounted for digital permanence. The footage is available for immediate review, I continued. I can pull it up on the monitor in the back office right now. I believe you'll find it quite clarifying.
Wait, Beatrice shouted, her voice cracking. You can't do that. That's a violation of my privacy. I didn't consent to being filmed. This is a private business, Mrs. Van Horn, the officer said, his tone shifting to something much colder.
And you're standing in the middle of a crime scene. Officer Miller, stay here with the suspect. Maya, lead the way. As I walked toward the back office, I didn't look back at Beatrice. I didn't need to see her face to know that the rotten root of her entitlement was finally being ripped out.
Chapter 7: The Digital Mirror. The back office of Vanguard Horology is a sterile, functional space. It's dominated by a wall of monitors and a heavy server rack that hums with the steady rhythm of data being processed. It is the brain of the boutique, and today it was about to act as the ultimate witness.
The older officer, Sergeant Miller, stood behind me as I sat at the console. My hands were steady. I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain in my cheek had subsided into a dull throb, a physical reminder of the truth I was about to display. "All right, Maya," Miller said. "Start from the beginning."
I pulled up the timestamp for 2:14 p.m. The screen flickered to life. There was Beatrice. On the 4K wide angle of camera 1, she looked like a charging bull. You could see the sheer force with which she slammed the blue velvet box onto the glass. You could see the vibration of the counter.
Even without the audio, the aggression was palpable. "She's moving fast," Miller noted. "No hesitation." I switched to the audio feed. Beatrice's voice filled the room, jagged and loud. "Refund, now." We watched in silence as the interaction unfolded.
I watched myself, the customer service mask in full effect. I looked like a statue, calm and professional, while Beatrice became increasingly animated. "Look at her hands," I pointed out. On camera 3, we saw Beatrice's finger poking the glass, inches from my face.
We saw her sweep the LazyQ vase off the table. On the high-fidelity audio, the sound of the crystal shattering was bone-chilling. You could see me barely flinch. "You're very calm," Miller said, looking at me with a newfound respect. "Most people would be screaming back."
I was following the Grey Rock Protocol, I explained. Reaction is what she wanted. I wasn't going to give it to her. Then came the climax. Camera 4 had the money shot. It was a medium close-up of the counter. You could see Beatrice's face contorted in a snarl. You could see the moment her eyes locked onto mine. And then, the throw. The box flew through the air in slow motion on the replay. It caught me right on the cheekbone. The footage was so clear you could see the skin break and the single drop of blood emerge. I didn't move.
I didn't duck. I just stood there taking the hit like a literal rock. "That's a felony-grade projectile," Miller muttered. "Weighted box aimed at the head. That's assault with a deadly weapon depending on how the DA wants to play it."
But the footage didn't stop there. We watched as Beatrice reached across the counter. Her hands moved in a blur, grabbing my collar. The camera captured the way she jerked me forward. It captured her screaming directly into my face, the spittle, the bulging veins, the pure, unadulterated malice.
Look at me when I'm talking to you, her voice roared from the speakers. That's enough, Miller said, his voice hard. I've seen enough. He stepped out of the office and into the main boutique area. I followed him.
Beatrice was sitting on one of our leather consultation chairs, her handbag clutched to her chest. She looked up as we emerged, her eyes searching Miller's face for any sign of the socialite pass she'd been using her entire life.
Well, she asked, her voice trembling. You saw it, right? You saw how she provoked me, how she was being aggressive. Mrs. Van Horn, Miller said, and he didn't call her ma'am this time.
I just watched the most one-sided piece of evidence I've seen in 20 years on the force. I saw you commit property damage. I saw you throw a weighted object at a woman's face. And I saw you physically grab her and threaten her while she stood there and did absolutely nothing but her job.
Beatrice's face went a shade of gray that matched the marble floors. But she was being cold. She was being rude. She wouldn't give me my money. Being cold isn't a crime, Mrs. Van Horn, Miller said. He reached for the handcuffs on his belt.
The sound of the metal ratcheting was the final bell for the Van Horn era. Assault, battery, and felony property damage are. Stand up and put your hands behind your back.
No, Beatrice shrieked, backing away. You can't. Do you know who my husband is? He'll have your badge. He'll have to wait in line at the precinct, Miller said, and with a swift, practiced motion, he secured her wrists.
Beatrice Van Horn, the woman who made the policies, was led out of Vanguard Horology in handcuffs. She was screaming, crying, and threatening everyone within earshot, but for the first time in her life, no one was listening. The digital mirror had shown her exactly who she was. Chapter 8: The Price of Silence. The aftermath of a storm is often quieter than the storm itself, but for Vanguard Horology, the silence was filled with the frantic energy of corporate damage control. By 5:00 p.m., the police had gone, taking Beatrice and the shattered Criterion watch with them. By 5:15 p.m., the vultures of silence had arrived. The first was Charles Van Horn. He didn't come with a handbag. He came with a team of 3 lawyers in charcoal suits that cost more than my car. Charles was a man who looked like he had been carved out of mahogany and old money. He didn't scream like his wife. He whispered. In the world of high finance, a whisper is more dangerous than a roar. I was in my office, finally having cleaned the blood from my face and applied a small, discreet bandage. I looked at him through the glass partition.
He didn't look like a man whose wife had just been arrested. He looked like a man who was trying to calculate the cost-benefit analysis of a bad merger. Maya, he said, stepping into my office. His lawyers stayed outside, standing like gargoyles in the lobby.
I've seen the reports, I've heard parts of the story. I'm here to resolve this. The resolution is in the hands of the DA, Mr. Van Horn, I said, my gray rock mask firmly back in place. I have already filed my statement and the evidence has been seized.
Everything is negotiable, Maya, he said, sitting across from me. He didn't ask permission. Beatrice is high-strung. She's had a difficult year, the stress of the GMT being defective. It wasn't defective, I interrupted. It struck a painted wall at high velocity.
Your wife threw it. The footage is very clear on that point. Charles didn't blink. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a checkbook. It was a beautiful, leather-bound thing. Vanguard is a small boutique. An incident like this, it's bad for brand image.
It's bad for your career. If this goes to trial, Beatrice's defense team will have to look into your history, your finances, your family. It will be unpleasant. This was the subtle threat. He wasn't yelling. He was promising a slow, legal drowning. However, he continued, if we can reach a mutual misunderstanding agreement, if you were to withdraw your statement and claim that the video was misinterpreted or that you moved in a way that looked like a provocation, I am authorized to offer you a settlement for your distress.
He wrote a number on a slip of paper and pushed it across the desk. $50,000. $50,000 to lie. $50,000 to let Beatrice walk away and pretend that my blood hadn't touched the floor. That's a lot of money for a glorified clerk, I said, echoing his wife's words.
Charles smiled, a thin, oily thing. It's a life-changing amount for someone in your position. Think about it. You could quit this job, you could travel. All you have to do is say you made a mistake. That Beatrice was the one being harassed.
I looked at the number. I thought about the way Beatrice had grabbed my collar. I thought about the way she had looked at me as if I were a bug under her heel. I have a counteroffer, Mr. Van Horn, I said. His eyes brightened. He thought he'd won. He thought everyone had a price. I'm going to stay in this job, I said. I'm going to provide the DA with the high bitrate raw files of every camera angle. I'm going to testify in open court. And I'm going to ensure that every watch collector in the state knows that the Van Horns aren't just wealthy, they're violent.
Charles's smile vanished. You're making a mistake, Maya. You can't win against us. We have the resources to bury you in motions for the next decade. You have money, I said. I have the record, and in the age of the internet, a record is more permanent than a bank account.
Is that your final word? He hissed, leaning in. Actually, I said, leaning back and tapping a button on my desk. I'm also filing a civil suit for the LazyQ vase, the damage to the boutique, and the personal injury to my face. Since you just offered me $50,000 to lie, I think my lawyer will find that very interesting in the punitive damages phase of the trial. It sounds a lot like witness tampering, doesn't it? Charles Van Horn stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. He realized he wasn't dealing with a clerk. He was dealing with a forensic accountant of justice. You'll regret this, he whispered. Probably, I said, but at least I'll be able to check the time on a watch that isn't broken. Chapter 9: The Public Record. The internet is a strange machine. You feed it a small spark of truth, and it can grow into a fire that consumes an entire legacy in hours. I didn't leak the video. I didn't have to. The moment Beatrice Van Horn was led out of the boutique in handcuffs, in broad daylight, on a busy downtown street, a dozen smartphones were already recording. By the next morning, the boutique Karen was the #1 trending topic on Twitter and Reddit. The grainy cell phone footage of her being shoved into the back of a patrol car was everywhere. But the grainy footage was just the appetizer. The real meal came when the DA's office, feeling the pressure of a high-profile case involving a wealthy donor, released the material evidence. I woke up on Thursday to find the R-entitled people and R-pro-revenge subreddits in a state of absolute euphoria. The 4K footage of the Grey Rock encounter had been uploaded to YouTube by a local news outlet. Millions of people watched Beatrice throw the box. Millions of people watched Beatrice grab my collar, and millions of people watched me, unmoving, unblinking, with a single drop of blood on my cheek. The comments were a symphony of justice. User 1: That manager is a literal legend. User 2: Look at the Karen's face when she realizes she's on camera. That's the exact moment her soul leaves her body. User 3: Vanguard Horology needs to give that woman a raise. She just saved their brand by not giving an inch. But the social fallout was only half of the story. The rotten root was being exposed in other ways. Once the boutique Karen story went viral, other people started coming forward. A former nanny for the Van Horns posted about the years of verbal abuse she'd suffered. A waiter from a high-end bistro shared a story about Beatrice throwing a glass of wine at him because the vintage was too young. The narrative of the high-strung socialite was being replaced by the reality of a serial abuser. Charles Van Horn tried to fight back. He hired a PR firm to release a statement claiming Beatrice was suffering from a private medical condition. They tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee who had baited a sick woman into an outburst. It didn't work. The video was too clear. The Grey Rock was too undeniable. You can't bait someone by standing perfectly still and saying nothing. Then came the malicious compliance phase of my own plan. Vanguard's corporate office in Houston, terrified of the bad press, sent a representative to mediate the situation.
They wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, in exchange for a promotion. They wanted the story to die. I'm happy to sign an NDA, I told the representative. but only if it includes a clause that the Van Horns are permanently banned from all Vanguard locations worldwide. And I want the settlement for the LazyQ vase to be paid directly into a scholarship fund for retail workers who have been victims of workplace violence. The representative looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Maya, we're trying to move past this. A permanent ban is aggressive.
So is throwing a 2-pound wooden box at my head, I replied. I'm not interested in moving past it. I'm interested in ensuring it never happens again. If you don't agree to the ban, I'll be happy to take my story and the records of how the board ignored my safety warnings to the New York Times. I had the emails. I had the logs of every time I'd requested better security protocols and been told it wasn't in the budget. I had the receipts for their negligence as well. They signed the agreement. Beatrice and Charles Van Horn were officially persona non grata in the world of high-end horology. Their names were added to the red flag list that every luxury boutique in the country shares. They couldn't buy a watch in this town or any other major city if their life depended on it. Chapter 10: The Verdict of Time. 3 months later, I was standing in a courtroom. It wasn't the mahogany-lined vacuum of the Van Horn boardroom. It was a cold, fluorescent-lit room that smelled of floor wax and tired lawyers. Beatrice Van Horn didn't look like a socialite. She was wearing a conservative, high-necked dress in a muted gray, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She looked like she was trying to blend into the furniture, but she couldn't hide from the monitors. The monitors were currently replaying the 4K footage for the judge. The cold justice verdict was delivered with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. Beatrice pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and felony property damage. The medical condition defense had been laughed out of the preliminary hearing. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen 1,000 Karens in her career, didn't hold back. Mrs. Van Horn, the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. You have spent your life believing that the rules are for other people. You believed that your wealth gave you the right to treat another human being like a punching bag. But the law doesn't care about your zip code. It cares about the evidence. The sentence was a masterpiece of karmic alignment. 1 year of probation. 500 hours of community service, specifically at a public recycling facility where she would be spending her days handling scrap metal. A mandatory anger management course, and a permanent restraining order that kept her at least 500 feet away from me and Vanguard horology. But the real nuclear option came from the civil suit. Charles Van Horn had tried to bury me in motions, but my lawyer, a woman who lived for cases like this, had counterattacked with a discovery request that opened up the Van Horns' financial records. To avoid the public exposure of their offshore tax havens, Charles settled. The amount was undisclosed, but the Maya Scholarship for Retail Safety was launched with a 7-figure endowment. I was back in the boutique on the day the news was announced. The air was still filtered and scentless. The marble floors were still polished, but the atmosphere had changed. The staff didn't look like stagehands anymore. They looked like professionals who knew their worth. I was standing behind the primary consultation desk when the chime echoed. A young man walked in. He looked nervous. He was clutching a small box. He approached the desk and looked at my name tag. Maya, he asked. Yes, I said, my customer service mask offering a genuine, warm smile. How can I assist you today? I bought this watch for my father's retirement, he said, opening the box. It was a simple, elegant Criterion dress watch. I noticed a tiny scratch on the buckle. I was wondering if it's supposed to be like that. I looked at the watch. I looked at the man. I didn't see an entitled person. I saw a customer. It's not supposed to be like that, I said. Let's get that fixed for you. At no charge, of course. We value our customers' precision. As I took the watch, I looked up at camera 4. It was still there, unblinking and unmoving. It was the silent witness that had saved my life and destroyed a legacy. In the world of high-end horology, We say a well-made watch is a legacy of time. But I've learned that the most important legacy isn't the machine, it's the truth it records. The Cold Justice Masterclass, the Vanguard Lessons. The destruction of Beatrice Van Horn was a forensic execution of the system as a mirror. First, the Grey Rock Foundation. By refusing to provide an emotional target, Maya forced the antagonist to escalate until she committed a crime on camera. Silence is the ultimate trap for a narcissist. Second, the digital permanence. In the modern world, the receipts are no longer just paper, they are 4K metadata. Beatrice's attempt to rewrite history failed because the digital record cannot be bullied or bribed. Third, the Trident expansion. Maya attacked on 3 vectors: legal criminal charges, social the viral video, and financial the civil suit and the scholarship. A single attack is a fight, a Trident attack is a siege. The takeaway: the person who understands the rules of operation better than the person who holds the title of power will always win the long game. Justice is about the person who refuses to blink. Case closed.